Since Big Brother and Survivor popularized reality TV at the turn of the new millennium with their dramatic serializations of social experiments, we have seen numerous iterations of how competitive survival shows can replicate real-life societal phenomena. In some ways, free from the guardrails of real life, in other ways directed to perform in entertaining ways by precisely laid out rule sets in their artificial environments, the best of these shows can offer some really compelling and fascinating storylines, made all the more intense by our knowledge these characters, though often deceptively edited, aren't works of fiction. They are contestants working sometimes desperately to balance their chance of winning with their social standing both in and outside the game, between other contestants and under the microscope of public scrutiny. Among the best recent iterations of this survival formula, coming from South Korea and released on Netflix, is The Devil's Plan, the second season of which has stirred up a bit of controversy in how it tried to circumvent the gameplay philosophy of a particular contestant from season 1.
이 사람의 성격이나 캐릭터를 많이 봐요. 근데 우리도 이제 시즌 1을 해서 이 궤도라는 캐릭터 때문에 생기는 스토리가 시즌 1을 지배했듯이
죄송합니다.
네, 그러니까 그게 모든 게 결국은 어떤 출연자가 나오느냐가 그 시즌의 스토리를 결정하는 자가 되겠어요. 거기 때문에 뭘 그래?
Sharing the same showrunner and much of the same crew, when the first season of The Devil's Plan released in 2023, it was recognizably a spiritual successor of The Genius. In my opinion, refining its format of intelligent individuals competing in mind-bending, board game-esque challenges, massively raising the bar of its maximum entertainment potential by inviting its contestants to live in isolation together for the duration they remain uneliminated. The intricate gameplay involved in its elaborate challenges are now all the more informed, influenced, and enhanced by the inevitable drama stemming from intimate socialization, forming strategic and emotional alliances in an environment free from the distractions of the real world, making each and every loyalty, betrayal, mistake, and success all the more important in their minds in the downtime they have no choice but to remain immersed during. Everything feels all the more real to them and us because, in a controlled way, it is the real lives they must briefly lead in the pursuit of a large cash prize. Or, as interestingly turned out to be the case with some contestants, the cash was never their main motivation. Unavoidably, my analysis will be illustrated by showing and discussing spoilers for The Devil's Plan Season 1 and then Season 2. So if that's a deal breaker for any interest you may have in watching either season, I definitely recommend you do watch it first, for Season 1 delivers some great philosophical clashings over the course of its well-structured and ultimately satisfying storyline, and Season 2, while stumbling in narrative quality for much of its duration, is still worth viewing as a social experiment and maintains all of the production quality, setting this series apart from others I've seen in the genre. In particular, how its music heightens the stakes and impact of dramatic moments that the show's complexity might otherwise make difficult to follow along with. The budget provided by Netflix can be good for something. The Devil's Plan Season 1 consists of main matches wherein contestants compete to earn the show's currency called pieces, and at the end of which the two contestants with the fewest pieces are sent to prison for the night, and prize matches wherein all but the two contestants sent to prison must cooperate to increase the prize pool towards its maximum payout. Contestants are eliminated if and when they have no pieces left, gaining, losing, and sharing pieces amongst their allies, using them to compete in matches and purchasing favors over the course of the season. The first match is a social deduction game similar to the popular party game Mafia.
여기 브리핑 드리겠습니다. 현재 시민 필승법이 있고요. 지금 저는 약간 어느 정도 해법이 있거든요. 시민 쪽에서의.
The somewhat meta deduction skills of a contestant called Orbit immediately stand out. This is the guy who will persistently employ a philosophy in contradiction with some of his fellow contestants and the intended structure of the show itself.
넷플릭스 1화치고는 좀 약하게 가는 것 같은데요?
이것이 과학이다. 네, 이 데빌스 플랜의 이 과학 커뮤니케이터를 부른 것 자체가 너무 조금 아쉽지 않았나.
좀 압도적이었어요.
아니 게임에 과학이 붙어 있는 거라서 이거는 제가 어떻게 할 수가 없었어요. 이번 게임은 저의 좀 무대였던 것 같고.
But although he gets a confidence boost from starting off so strong, Orbit's command of the civilians results in them losing the match, and the winners choose who, from those with the same lowest amount of pieces, to be sent to prison, basing their decision on who they felt contributed the least to this match, in the hopes of having the best team to beat the prize match later on.
우리 다음부터
닥치고 있어도
진짜 낮은 자세로 임하자.
우리 방이 트롤했네.
As would also turn out to be the case in Season 2, the first main match goes a long way to establish the alliances and contestant playstyles that determine the rest of the season. Orbit is one of the strongest contestants of Season 1, maintaining a consistently precise grasp on how to game the mechanics of every match they play, but the contestants assigned citizen roles in this first main match remain in a majority alliance he attempts to carry through the rest of the season against the efforts of those in the minority alliance. Perhaps he came into the show planning to follow this majority wins strategy from the beginning, but how he persists with what is basically a communistic attempt to prevent anyone being eliminated, despite the obvious fruitlessness of delaying the inevitable pointed out by those in the minority alliance, becomes a great foundation for the underdog story that ultimately involves him losing the season after all of his followers have, of course, been eliminated. What's unusual about him that the showrunners wanted to avoid with Season 2 is he doesn't stick to this strategy out of blind arrogance or deceptive self-benefit, but because in his pursuit for a perfect scientific approach to each match, he seemingly genuinely misses the point that the survival show he's being filmed participating in just doesn't work like that. Sharing pieces to indefinitely prevent anyone's elimination, someone has to win in the end. Either that, or he sought to dismantle the game's mechanics as a challenge to the showrunners themselves, but that really would be arrogant.
본인 능력으로 다 점수를 딴 게 아니잖아.
아니잖아. 지금.
들러붙어가지고 다 딴 거지. 이게 데블스 플랜이야? 이게 그냥 빌부터 플랜이지? 그렇게 해서 살아남으면 뭐해? 그냥 계속 그냥 저거 꽂아놓은 보리자루 마네킹 마냥 이렇게 있는 건데 그 인원 계속 살려놓고 있으면 뭐 할 거야?
Beyond contradicting the competitive nature of the show, his little simplified communism simulation becomes the linchpin of his contention with the minority alliance, specifically after his autocratic self-righteousness causes the elimination of one of the strongest, most promising contestants instead of any of the weaker contestants being carried by his majority alliance. What's more is, amongst a cast of celebrities, this strong contestant, who helped orchestrate the outcome of the first match whilst himself playing the fanatic, was one of only 2 non-celebrities, passing the already highly competitive open casting call because he aced the test. So it's quite the sting to the morale of the minority alliance, having been reduced from 4 members, then to 3, and now to 2. And these 2 are vocal in their frustration. Seokjin criticizes the approach to sacrifice a strong player for the sake of a larger number of weaker players, comparing the elimination to Brazil getting knocked out of the World Cup in the first round. At least confined to the way he explains it here, he prioritizes meritocracy over his own self-interest to win, almost as though winning against an undeserving opponent would be unsatisfactory and a missed opportunity for the entertainment value of the competition. Parallel to that, Shi-won suggests Orbit's strategy, intentionally or not, benefits him by hiding behind a virtuous-sounding philosophy that works to eliminate the strong players who will threaten his control of the majority, giving him easy opponents to pick off in the final matches, lessening how challenging it will be for him to be crowned the winner. It reaches a point where members of the majority alliance also start questioning and straining against Orbit's philosophy, annoyed that they feel pressured to suffer and hinder their own chances of winning in order to prolong the lives of others.
궤도를 위한 거잖아요. 궤도 철학 지키려고 지금 모든 사람들이 같이 연합에 있는 사람들조차도 피해를 봐가면서 다른 사람을 지키는데 동참해야 되는 거잖아요.
In order to beat Orbit's alliance, and eventually Orbit himself, Seokjin calculates and manipulates one of the main matches to the result of sending himself and Shi-won to prison after the elimination of Shi-won's friend, briefly coming across as a baffling, blunderous betrayal of his own alliance, until Shi-won and those who return to the living room realize he had discovered the key to access a secret challenge in the prison, which he and Shi-won could now figure out together. The dramatic twist keeps going as Shi-won's failed attempt at the challenge causes her to be eliminated, and Seokjin later avenges her. His commitment to their alliance, time spent piecing together the secrets needed to access the challenge, and winning its high-stakes reward, becoming a great, if maybe slightly melodramatic prerequisite to him returning from prison to eventually win the season. Even if subsequent seasons of The Devil's Plan or other survival shows the creator goes on to make would want to avoid the structure Orbit created, the underdog story they were likely thankful to salvage from Seokjin's success is the kind of thing they'd certainly be looking to repeat. Unfortunately, it seems the events of Season 2 were too messy for them to find an edit of similar quality, less a greenhouse of various vibrant plants and more a petri dish of cold, calculated research. Or maybe, given the bizarrely unfair setup of the season's mechanics, they also misjudged the kind of story their audience would like to see. Riddled with more miscommunications, allegiance disorganization and flip-flopping, and increasingly convoluted match mechanics, the new cast of contestants struggle to recreate the compelling philosophical and strategic rivalries that defined the first season. This time around, the mechanics of the game feel so fundamentally unfair that many viewers have been left questioning whether it was a deliberate commentary on societal inequality. The worst culprit is the change to the prison system. Unlike how in Season 1, the 2 contestants with the fewest pieces were sent to prison and missed out on the prize match, half of the remaining contestants are now sent to prison, where they must participate in a death match, the loser of which gets eliminated. The showrunner wanted properly split factions between the living area and prison area, their separation making it more difficult to resolve conflicts and misunderstandings that occurred during the main matches, but additional mechanics regarding the distribution of pieces, or rather the lack thereof, determines that all but one of those who end up in prison over the course of the season remains there until they are eliminated in a death match or from having 0 pieces during a main match, and other unfair differences between the prison and living area make staying in prison as long as some of these contestants do increasingly demoralizing.
진짜 근데 대단하긴 하다. 너는 지금 5번을 통과한 거야.
그럼 난 내일은 생활동에서 자고 싶어.
The area-based split not only encourages, but effectively forces contestants into 2 evenly divided alliances, contestant crossover restricted because of limited interaction between each side, fostering a stagnant environment where attempts to bridge the divide results in more betrayal, drama and resentment, splitting them further apart. The prisoners' loyalties are always a bit shaky, but do get tighter the more they suffer together, whereas the living room alliance spends much more peaceful time relaxing together. Everyone is incentivized to cozy up to those with the most pieces, which always ends up being the same group to return to the living room each day, except for either the poorest of them or someone strategically selected as a sort of sacrifice, who must move to prison out of necessity to fill the vacancy left by the previous night's elimination, rather than, for instance, being punished for poor gameplay or some emotional disagreement with the rest of the living room alliance. The death matches are the season's most exciting games because they're way easier to understand than the main matches and have become the primary method of contestant elimination. The prisoners get more entertaining screen time, and the audience finds it easier to root for them as a result of partaking in multiple death matches, but it's also an additional brain workout with higher stakes that the living room contestants are free from being exhausted by, instead sitting back and continuing their peaceful socialization whilst watching a live feed of the death matches on their TV.
와 이렇게 또 이걸 라이브로 이렇게 하는구나. 하루 종일. 아니 그냥 넷플릭스 보는 거 같은데 지금?
From the safety and comfort of the living room, their close observation of each character's playstyle allows them to identify who may pose a threat in the main matches. Repeating the same dance with death every night makes the prisoners feel oppressed, and when deciding who to collaborate with in the main matches, the living room contestants compare their camaraderie with the unavoidably selfish desperation they saw on display in the death matches.
아니 여기는 단백질이 있어.
있지 우리. 항상 있었어. 우리는 균형 있는 식사만 했어.
밥이 진짜 잘 나오는 거예요. 아니 그 밥을 먹은 사람들이랑 저를 그냥 붙이신 거예요?
Those who were never really a part of the living room alliance, who easily integrated into the prison alliance once they found themselves there, and of course we the audience, always having access to both environments, are able to compare the extreme luxury disparity. The living room is more extensive than the first season, with large beds, lavish meals, a gym, and just generally more separate spaces. The prison is also larger than the dingy cube from the first season, but with nowhere but the bathroom to isolate from the constant close proximity of now half of the season's contestants, eating stale bread, soup and milk while sitting on their narrow beds or the hard wooden floorboards. Well, you'd be slightly insane not to side with the significant disadvantage further imposed on these underdogs by back-to-back nights of mental exhaustion and malnourishment. The more sympathetic of the Living Room Alliance even start bringing them some nourishment when they meet up for the main match, and one prisoner makes it her mission to spend the downtime of a match going around eating up all the snacks. Not exactly a satisfactory replacement for meals so lavish the Living Room contestants start to feel guilty eating them.
형 근데 왜 이렇게 많이 안 드세요?
아 근데 오늘 좀 세아도 있고 그래서 웃고 있지만 이게 잘 안 들어가진다 잘.
거의 밥을 안 드시더라고요. 저는 다 거의 비웠는데 소희 누나는 사실 뭘 드시는지 잘 모르겠고 그래서 이 사람들 다 보기에 겨웠구나. 예. 그래서 한 번쯤 감옥 가셔야 될 것 같습니다.
The longer the prisoners stay in prison, the less likely they'd be able to recover to be on equally energized footing with those who have been in the living room the whole time. And that's if they manage to escape, which only one of them does, and not because of anything that occurs during a main match or death match. Pieces are scarcely awarded in main matches compared to the first season. At least scarcely enough, the Prison Alliance never catches up based on the pieces they get in a main match, and only one of the death matches involves an interesting mechanic where prisoners could risk getting closer to elimination to gain more pieces, albeit an again measly amount. To make matters worse, pieces can only be traded between contestants from within their respective living spaces, meaning no rich contestant from the living room can choose to pity a prisoner by gifting them enough pieces to join the living room, or even give them a temporary buying power during a main match. The only environment in which everyone is gathered together where that would be possible, and the prisoners don't really have enough collective pieces amongst them to pool in the hands of one contestant. But there's little reason they'd have to put themselves at further risk to do so, and whoever they elevate would be incentivized to betray them anyway. In fact, for the one guy that escapes, that is more or less what happens.
알겠습니다. 아 진짜 미안해. 아이고. 수고해.
Actively prevented from changing their fates at every turn, the remaining prisoners are trapped in a predictable struggle of delaying their inevitable elimination, unable to shift alliances in their favour or dominate the main matches at any point, let alone consistently enough they can gradually climb their way out of poverty, especially since they usually feel obligated to sabotage their strategies to fulfill the requirements to increase the prize pool, a frustrating replacement of the collaborative prize matches that served that purpose in the first season. The singular time a prisoner acquires enough pieces of their own volition to join the living room at the end of the next main match is when they succeed in the prison's hidden challenge of this season, which had already eliminated a prisoner after they all discovered how to access the challenge pretty much as soon as it was possible to do so. Hyunjun enters the challenge, like the contestant before him, expecting to encounter the Knight's Tour game they'd been practicing and memorizing. His nerves are tested as he crawls down a pitch-black tunnel and must solve a sort of riddle before the time runs out, pressing buttons with images whose first letters match the sentence whilst they become submerged under rising water. The grueling, unexpected intensity makes him cry as soon as he beats the clock and receives the reward. And since 10 pieces is such a big amount to gain all at once compared to how few are rewarded elsewhere, he does avoid prison for almost the entire rest of the season. Why he returns to prison and therein gets eliminated is because he flip-flops between staying loyal to his poor friends in prison and sucking up to the power of a specific living room contestant who had acquired an even greater advantage from beating a hidden challenge of his own. Here is where the Prison Alliance is most directly, explicitly screwed over by the mechanics of the season. Whereas accessing and beating the hidden challenge in Season 1 meant orchestrating your own imprisonment and took a whole season's worth of discoveries to accomplish, the Season 2 contestants have come with meta-knowledge that there will be at least a hidden advantage to discover, and so, naturally, they discover them quickly and easily, reminding me of how hidden immunity idols in Survivor became something contestants would go and search for prior to being given clues that there even were any idols. The Devil's Plan showrunner has even expressed disappointment at the coinciding quickness with which each area's secrets were discovered. However, the mistake was not in underestimating the ease with which they would be discovered, but obstructing the area crossover that was essential to accessing the hidden challenge in Season 1. Now, instead, rather catastrophically, both the prison and living room have hidden challenges independent of each other. Bearing in mind that the prison challenge involved a physically demanding surprise they couldn't practice for as they were led to believe, the living room challenge turns out to be exactly what they were also led to believe, a room-sized Knight's Tour. The Knight's Tour itself doesn't even seem particularly difficult for most of this season's contestants, figuring out algorithms together and memorizing an exact solution. Only when the grid unexpectedly increases to 8 × 8 does the contestant who entered the challenge, Hyung-gyu, have to stop and think long enough to use most of his time limit, using sheets of paper he so happened to bring in with him to help keep track of his order, which does definitely come across as cheating, and I'm surprised the showrunner didn't intervene with after he pulled them out of his pocket. Not only does Hyung-gyu succeed, but in attempting the challenge, he was free from the risk of elimination imposed on the prison challenge, and his reward of what turns out to be the same amount of pieces is made all the more powerful by the deception that he can keep the truth of his advantage secret. All anyone knows is that he has an advantage they assume will make him a tough opponent to beat in the final match, but actually he can signal to receive his 10 pieces at any point, keeping secret a wealth that would paint a target on anyone's back because it makes one so likely to remain safe in the living room and reach the final match, effectively giving him a get-out-of-jail lifeline if and when the Prison Alliance do strategize to whittle down his piece count.
히든 스테이지 보상 쓰도록 하겠습니다.
이거 뭐야?
It's the most disheartening gut punch they suffer the entire season, the dramatic reveal that thwarts their efforts to knock Hyung-gyu down from his pedestal, from which his 2 most loyal followers seem more committed to protecting him than to winning the season themselves.
그건 내가 외치면 바로 준대. 그래서 나는 감옥을 절대 안 가야 될 이유가 생겼어.
야, 희한하네 그러면. 진짜 그러면 불사신인 거잖아.
Despite being exclusively told the details of his hidden challenge advantage, that he has a secret 10-piece safety net that will save him from prison or elimination, one of them still goes so far as maneuvering himself into being eliminated in his place. The other has to be convinced to claim the top spot during the final main match, saving herself from prison by the final dying resistance wishes of the then extinct Prison Alliance, which is the only reason Hyung-gyu ends up in prison or faces the risk of elimination at any point all season. The storyline the season tried to salvage from this bizarrely artificial feeling situation doesn't come close to the one they successfully built in Season 1, where Seokjin's victory felt like an earned conclusion of the strategic gameplay and emotional struggle their minority alliance had endured against Orbit. Hyung-gyu is clearly one of the smartest competitive contestants of Season 2, and we must assume, though it fails to come across on screen, its most skilled social manipulator, but his arc lacks real adversity, spending the season comfortably positioned at the top of the living room hierarchy, all the members of whom spend half the season watching the other half of the cast take part in the death matches. It makes his win feel like a foregone conclusion preordained by the design flaws in the game itself. The clear dichotomy between the rich living room contestants and the poor prison contestants, whether an intentional simulation of systematic wealth inequality or not, is, frankly, depressingly close to reality for a competitive survival show otherwise designed to compare the intelligence of different professions. The rich grew richer the more they reinforced the security of their alliance, whilst the poor lacked the opportunity to amass the resources to stand on an even playing field. And when a singular prisoner does find riches, they end up turning on the underdogs they left behind in order to preserve their newfound alignment with the rich.
몇 개 있어?
잠깐만요.
잠깐만요. 부럽다.
오빠 원래 부자들은 통장 잔고를 모른다고
그렇구나.
했어.
맞아.
이게 사회 축소판이야.
Besides its societal commentary, some of the contestants staying in prison as long as they do, working harder for less nourishment, just seems cruel. The Majority Alliance may have been able to control the flow of the main matches in Season 1, but the Living Room Alliance of Season 2 benefited primarily from privileges so superior to those afforded to the Prison Alliance that they barely crossed over, coasting on their favourable starting positions. And all of this becomes especially grim and deeply ironic coming from a hyper-capitalistic society like South Korea, a country whose most internationally acclaimed media, Parasite and Squid Game, are themselves scathing critiques of wealth inequality.